Hi and welcome to Study Room. This is Prataksha, your history teacher, and today I'll be discussing with you the fourth chapter of history, the age of industrialization. In this chapter, we'll be discussing about the industrial revolution that took place in Europe, especially in England, towards the end of the 18th century, that is the 1700s, and also how it flourished during the further centuries, especially in the 1800s, the immediate 19th century. Also, we'll be having a closer look about how this industrialization came across England and in England's colonies, especially India. So let's get started with the chapter. The glorification of machines and technology. By and by, when industries, technology, new machinery, they started spreading across the whole of Europe, different publishers and different printing presses, they started advertising, they started, familiarizing the common masses about this industrial growth, about this new advancement. All right. So the famous musician of that time, E.T. Paul, he was a music producer, okay, or you can say a music publisher, because during those times there were books in which music symbols and signs they used to be written, right? So he was one of the prominent ones that published this figure that you can see over here. This is an angel figure dressed in white and she has wings. All right, the wings were the symbol of time. All right, that how she is now rising above the past times and heading towards the future times. And what does the future hold? The future holds, as you can see here in this poster, new machines, printing presses, books, new different types of technologies. So basically a displacement from you can say handmade labor or hand done labor towards machine produced labor. Okay, and similarly here over this the second poster which you can see over here, we have the figure of Aladdin towards the upper side of the poster, and towards the lower side we have a very modern man wearing a shirt, pants and shoes, wearing a cap. So he's a very sturdy looking man, and he is envisioning towards a future where you have tall buildings, where you have bridges, where you can see ships carrying on the business, all right, towards the ports. And so what does this poster symbolize? This poster symbolizes two things. First is about the eastern side, the you can say the exotification of the eastern countries, especially Asia, and the modernization of the West. So what this symbolizes is that the exotic countries of the eastern hand of the world, the eastern side of the world, and towards the western hand, towards the western side, we have the modernization. Okay, so Aladdin is the figure of the folklores of the eastern side towards the Asian side. So you have here the magician figure Aladdin, and he's rubbing his lamp, and there you have a building, a castle. All right. So all those richly, you can say those rich metals, those rich buildings that were a symbol of the earlier times. Okay, the earlier aristocracy that used to be prevalent. And now when you come towards the western side, that is towards the modernization side, so you have this here, this modern worker that is envisioning an area, envisioning a place where you have tall buildings, where you have bridges, and where you have other sorts of machineries. Okay, so this eastern side was also known as the Orient. All right, the Orient. And the western side, as you can see here, it's written Occidental. It was also known as the Occident. So there was always a binary between the Orient and the Occident. So the Orient was the old mystification side, the pre-modern era, all right, and whereas the West was the symbolization of the modern era. Okay, so the eastern side, it was the symbolization of the pre-modern era, all right, where you have folk tales, where you have all sorts of mystifications, and the West or the Occident is the symbolization of this modern era, all right. So published in the early 1900s, these images, they offered a very triumphant poster, they offered a very triumphant image of these new machines and technology that was, spreading very rapidly towards the whole of Europe, okay. Give two examples where modern development that is associated with progress had led to problems. So when you talk about when you talk about the 21st century, we know that all the modern developments more or less have contributed towards a decline of the environmental balance. All right. So nuclear weapons, we have already seen in the World War II that how these nuclear weapons unleashed an environment of terror, an environment of you can say distrust, misery, okay, and disease. We have been witnessing the COVID-19 outbreak, so that is no you can say it's no short of an explanation that how this modern development is also hinging more towards an environmental destruction, environmental issues such as global warming, such as the ozone hole. Okay, so the emission of various toxic pollutants, be it in the air, be it in the water, be it in the land. So all of these are contributing towards hazards that are ultimately, causing us human beings harm by the changing of the mercurial weather pattern. All right, so we know that modern development has more or less been hazardous towards our environmental balance, because we humans, we did not cater towards the delicate issues. We did not cater towards the important issues that we should have, that is with respect to the environment, that is with respect to the human life, and also other lives of creatures, such as not just animals but also plants. Okay, so here in this chapter, we will be talking about those periods such as the 1700s, okay, the 18th century, the 19th century, all right, and a little about the 1900s as well. So we will be discussing about these eras, and we will be discussing about how industrialization started prospering, how industrialization took its first hold in the world. Okay, so there is a term known as proto-industrialization. So proto means an earlier form of something which has started which has beginning to develop, all right, or beginning to take form. Okay, so beginning to develop. So something sort of proto-industrialization was already there before the modern machineries, before the modern factories, came to take the came to take place over all around the world. All right. So what does this proto-industrialization stands for? It stands for that in the earlier period, and I'm here talking about, you can say, the earlier 1700s. What used to happen was that whatever products that the rich people used to sell, they were actually made. The raw materials and the finishing of the raw materials was done by the poorer peasants. Okay, and the poor peasants had to look over the farms, because of course agriculture was the first kind of you can say job that made people earn money, that made people earn a livelihood. Okay, and that made people mostly settle down in areas, right? But due to rise in population, the cultivation, the industry of cultivation was not enough to sustain hungry mouths, all right, hungry families and increasing members. Okay, so there had to be an alternate solution about how to earn money. So the rich, the people who already had some money, they started commissioning, they started basically hiring the poorer peasants, those peasants who were living in the countryside, means those peasants who were already living in the villages. Okay, they started hiring them, and they told them that, look, I will be hiring you. You will be collecting raw material, you will be spinning them into yarns, and spinning them into the fabric, the you can say the initial fabric that would then process into finer pieces of the finer clothes that people wear. Okay, so rich people used to hire them, they used to make them work, and whatever the spinning, whatever the fabric that those poorer peasants used to spin, that those fabric would then come into major city areas such as London. Okay, and those fabrics would then get finished in London by fancy embroideries and whatever else, buttons and everything. Okay, that would give that fabric a very fine texture, a very, you can say, elegant texture. Okay, so this kind of industrialization was already in place before the advent of industries, before the advent of machines. All right, so you can see here this picture. This is a home, this is a drawing, this is a picture of a poor family where this lady, this woman is spinning the yarn, okay, via a wheel, okay, and here you can see this older woman is also involved in spinning work, and the younger child is also involved in doing some household chore. So basically each member of the family used to contribute towards the well-being, all right, be it you can say the domestic chores, or be it in the area of making money. Okay, so production was not based on factories, but the production was actually solely dependent on those poor peasants who used to work while living in the countryside, and who also used to spin fabric. All right, so that is how this sort of industrialization, or you can say this sort of machinery, took about in England during the early 1700s. So the result was that a close relationship formed between the town and countryside. So whatever people used to hire, whatever rich merchants, all right, whatever rich merchants used to hire, you can say the poor peasants, a sort of a relationship formed, a sort of bonding formed, where the where some merchants were dependent on those trusted peasants. All right. So it was not that every day they were on the lookout for new people in order to hire, but there a certain sort of trust, a certain sort of bonding was already in place, where these rich merchants were catering, where these poor peasants were catering towards the need and demand of the rich merchants, and where the rich merchants were then taking those bundles of cloths, those bundles of fabric, and transporting them towards the city area, towards the town area, that is the London and Manchester and other areas, and there the finished products used to be made, and then those products were imported or exported. Okay, so London came to be known as the finishing center, while most production took place in the countryside. So whatever the you can say the separation of different fibers, the consolidation of different fibers, then spinning them into fabric, all of these stuff, this used to take place in the countryside, and the finishing used to take place towards the in the city areas, that is in the London. Okay, and this produced a vast network of producers who were not working in factories. So even though there was no stereotypical industrialization, means there was no industrialization in the terms of setting up of factories or setting up of factory workers or laborers, but there was some sort of trade going on, some sort of proto industrialization going on, or you can say a nascent form of industrialization was already on the go. Okay, now the coming up of the factory changed many things. The earliest factory in England came by the 1730s, means you can say towards the middle, almost towards the middle of the 18th century. So firstly, England did not just jump into various production of various articles such as glass, iron, etc., etc. Okay, the first product that you can say was built up in factory or made in factory was actually cloth, was actually fabric, basically cotton. All right, so Britain's cotton import, it soared from 2.5 million pounds in 1760 to 22 million pounds. Why was this happening? This was happening because machines had started displacing, or machines had started substituting human labor. All right, and where one human labor, or you can say one human being could just cater to one piece of fabric or one piece of cloth at one time, these machines could now help the spinning of so many different so many different fabrics at one go. So only one labor, one human being was used to operate these machines, and then a spinning of 10 different fabrics or 10 different you can say yarn was taking place. All right, so this is why the import of cotton, it soared, because now machines had started displacing human beings, machines had started displacing human labor, and that meant that the slow production that was happening of cotton textiles or other sorts of fabric, the finished product, that pace was being intensified, that pace was being, you can say, increased, okay, quickened. So here you have Richard Arkwright's cotton mill was an invention that produced mass production of cotton clothes. Okay. Then the pace of industrial change, like I told you, cotton was the dynamic. It was the first, you can say, important product that was being used in the industrialization process. So that happened towards the 1840s, and then the item that was on the go was iron and steel industry. By 1873, Britain was exporting iron and steel worth 77 billion pounds. So what was happening here now, that the kind of labor that was involved between the poor peasants, that was now being displaced by machines. So now people were on the lookout for jobs. Why? Because earlier a lot of you can say raw materials were there, and many people were there, and almost each and every person was involved in spinning and weaving and everything, right? But now, since machines were displacing say 10 people, 20 people at one go, so what would happen to all those remaining people? They would be rendered jobless, right? So this initiated a travel from, you can say, a migration, not a travel, a migration from the countryside towards the city. So you have a lot of poets, you have a lot of, you can say, writers writing about this shift from the countryside towards the city, because the advent of industrialization, the advent of factories, and the setting up of factories was of course in city, because city, it was the city area where you had all the resources to, for those heavy machines to be set up, right? So now, earlier what used to happen, those poor peasants used to work in the confines of their home. They used to farm, and they also used to work. Okay, they did not used to leave their homes in order to find work or even to do work. But now these poor peasants, they had to leave their homes, they had to leave their respective countryside and move towards the city, migrate towards the city. All right, and since machines were displacing a lot of human labor, so there was rampant unemployment. All those people were searching for jobs. Okay, so that actually made created a sort of unrest. All right, and since cotton was the first product to be industrialized, first commodity to be produced via industries, the second product was iron and steel, because by the time we entered the 19th century, by the time we entered the 1800s, we had the invention of engine, we had the invention of railways. So to produce these railways, you had to now produce iron and steel on a very large scale. All right, and to basically produce, to meet the demands of those large scale iron and steel products, you had the industrialization, you had the setup of iron and steel factories. So now people were flocking towards the city. Some were working with the machines, some were doing the manual labor and setting up of different, you can say, channels through which those iron and steel products would be laid down. All right, and many people, they were basically looking for very different kinds of odd jobs, basically whatever could make them earn money in order to feed their hungry mouths, feed their family, and take care of them. Okay, so Britain was exporting iron and steel worth 77 million pounds. Okay, now, the pace of industrial change, like I told you, at the end of 19th century, that is towards the 1800s, less than 20% of the total workforce was employed in technologically advanced industrial sectors. So what was happening here is that towards the mid of the 1700s, the first industrialization of and the commodity was cotton. So the commodification of cotton via industries started to happen. But this shift was slow. This shift was slow because many people were not rich enough to equip these heavy machines. And if suppose some machines broke, then the repair work of those machines was also very expensive. All right, and some people, they wanted the intricacies that the hand work happened, the intricacies of the embroidery, the intricacies of the fabric that the weavers used to do by their hands. So all of those fine details, all of those fine intricacies could not be actually copied in that finer manner by machines. All right, so if you want to sew some very fine details, so the kind of product that you make via your hand and the kind of product that was produced by machines in those times, not I'm not talking about today's time, in those times, in 1700s, was very different. Okay, so many people, even the rich merchants, all of them, they did not very, they did not immediately started flocking towards industrialization. They started flocking towards equipment of heavy machineries. No, they were very reluctant, they were very hesitant, because whatever time was that, the prevalence was of handmade labor, the prevalence was of weaving, all right, via your hands, not via employing machines. Okay, so this was what was happening, that still 20% of the total workforce only was employed in technologically advanced industrial sectors. So it almost, you can say, took 1 to 2 centuries for this whole process to quicken. Okay, so that all of these industries, be it in the cotton, be it for the production of cotton, or be it for the production of different other materials such as iron, such as gas breweries, such as glasses, etc., it could all, quicken. The production could quicken. Okay, then small innovations, whatever small innovations were there, that helped the growth of the traditional non-mechanized sector. So, like I told you, whatever small modification they could incorporate, they did that in order to avoid switching up towards the heavy machines. Because, like I told you, these heavy machines, they were new, they were they were new to operate. So if any error came, if any damage came, that was very costlier for the rich merchants to repair. Okay, they were new, they were costly, all right, and they could not produce those finer details in the finished product that handmade products used to deliver. Okay, so technological adoption, therefore, it happened gradually. Okay, and they were very cautious. The rich people, they were very cautious about investing into these machineries. All right. But the advent of steam engine, when James Watt improved the steam engine produced by Newcomen, that made a very, you can say, a very important shift towards industrialization. Because now other factor had been added towards the cotton, and that was iron and steel industry. Okay, so the mass production, remember, of iron and steel, that was very started to become very prevalent towards the 1800s. Okay, and since this was more, you can say, complex than as compared to the cotton production, right? Because cotton is still fabric, but these steam engine, the production of these iron and steel, these are heavy machineries, right? So you can say this involved more risk. The cost was higher. Okay, so whenever you try to understand these concepts, and if you find them boring, because some of you may tend to do so, always try to follow up the logic, right? So whatever things have become easier for you right now, there must have been a time where these easier things would have started from the first place, started from zero, right? And that is why you have towards now the products that you use now, they are very advanced in quality, right? So there must have been a time where these products would have been in the nascent stage of production. So this is what we are talking about. So definitely when people were trying to shift from one perspective to another, okay, then it is always very risky. It is always sort of, you can say, leaving your comfort zone, because you're trying new things basically. Okay, you're trying new things. You don't know whether these new things would fail or whether these new things would prosper. Okay, so you are trying new things. All right, that is why that is why only 321 steam engines were there in England. Okay, were there in England by the 1800s. So here you have that James Watt, he patented the new engine in 1781. So towards the 1800s, only 321 steam engines were there, out of which 80, out of this 80 engines were for cotton. Okay, were for cotton, and 9 were for the production of wool, and the rest of them were the production of other items such as iron and steel, such as mining, such as coal, etc. So all of these took time, all of these took very, slow pace. Okay, then in Victoria, Britain, there was no shortage of human labor. So this I had explained you, because when the richer merchants were hiring the poor peasants, so they had a lot of people to look for. So people at those times, they were not devoid of any work, they were not devoid of employment. So naturally, when industrialization came about, and when hiring of fewer people to operate machines that could produce a mass production of commodities, that took place, naturally people would be desperate for job. So more people started flocking towards the city from the countryside. That concept that I had explained to you in one of the slides earlier. So that is why in Britain there was no shortage of human labor. Okay, So all those human labor that was required, say in the taking care of the machineries, or in operating the machineries, or in doing some other menial odd jobs, there was no shortage of that. All right. Whereas in other places such as America, there was shortage of laborers. Okay, that is why the Americans during these times, they started picking up um, African tribals as slaves, and the slave trade that we had studied in the previous chapter. So that was happening in America, but in Britain, as comparison, there was no shortage of handmade labor or hand labor, human labor. Okay, then lift of the workers. So there were a certain, you can say, areas where these workers uh, were not employed. Okay, what I mean is that there was something known as the seasonal labor. By seasonal labor, I mean the production of certain items, such as you can say the gas works, okay, or the breweries. Okay, means the wine or the different beverages that were there to drink. Okay, liquor. All right, and seasonal labor also involved Christmas. What I mean is that during the season of Christmas, there was an increase in the production of books, increase in the production of printed items. All right. So there were certain seasons, there were certain times of the year where the labor was increased. Okay, so a lot of people used to get jobs. But then again, when these seasons passed away, then only those people who were already employed in the factories got work, and the rest of them did not. All right. So this is what was happening. So when few people got the jobs in you can say the city areas, they started promising their friends. They started promising their group of people that if you come to the city side, I can get you job. Because now, since fewer people got jobs, okay, and not all of them were employed, so a lot of employment was starting happening through connections. So if you have connections towards people who are already working in some factories in the cities, you could easily go up to them and you could easily ask them for favor. All right. And if suppose you had no connections at all and you wanted to establish yourself as a working labor in a city area, that was very difficult, because like I told you, there were many people to work, but the work was very less. Or you can say the position of those works, the open positions of those works was very less, whereas the number of people who had applied or who were applying for the work was higher. Okay, so naturally, if there are large number of people, okay, and all of them are very desperate for work, so the wage was very low. So this made the task of the merchants very easier. Okay, they did not have to look for workers, they did not have to worry about paying them high wages. They knew that everyone was desperate for work, so even if you paid them less than what they deserved, they'd still be willing to work, because they had no other option, right? So low wages was there, and of course high employment rates, like I told you, like I explained this cycle. And what was the consequence of unemployment? Homelessness and extreme poverty, or in extreme cases, famine, starvation, death. Okay, so after the 1840s, the increase in building activity opened up more opportunities and employment. So the advent of railway engines, steam engines, and production of various other commodities via industries, that definitely did work for those unemployed people who were desperate to get jobs. That did work, but then again, the condition did not improve. Why? Because no matter how many people got employed, there was still the population was rising, right? So there were still people who were on the lookout for jobs, okay, who survived via just earning low wages, because that was what they could afford, and there were still people dying of homelessness and extreme poverty. Okay. Spinning jenny is a machine, or you can say is a machine. Yeah, it's a machine invented by James Hargreaves and was introduced in 1764 in the woolen industry. So what this spinning jenny used to do was it used to extract those woolen fibers, and it used to help in the production of fabric, or it used to help in the production of fabric, because earlier, one people only used to work upon one spindle, where you have those spinning and weaving process, right? So here, as you can see here, this is the photo of the spinning jenny. Jenny, this is the machine, and this one wheel could, you can see these small patterns that are here. These are channels, and in these channels, this one wheel could incorporate many spindles. So the spinning and weaving of um, different yarns into fabric, that was made very convenient, that was made very easier by the help of these machines known as spinning jenny. So earlier, mostly women were employed in the work of spinning and, differentiating fabric, spinning yarns into fabric, all right. And when spinning jenny was introduced via James Hargreaves in 1764, it caused an unrest because a lot of women were then rendered jobless. Okay, they did not have any they were also on the verge of shortage of employment, because only one person was now involved, to operate this one wheel, and this one wheel could then operate many other spindles that could then process those yarns into fabric via spinning. Okay, so when this spinning jenny was introduced, it caused a lot of unrest in the women workers of England. So explain why many workers were opposed to the use of spinning jenny. This was because in the spinning jenny, one wheel, I'm repeating this for you again, one wheel was employed to function or to operate upon many spindles, okay, and this then reduced the workload. This will reduce the workload because the employment of these many spindles, it isn't the task of spinning. It isn't the task of spinning of yarn into fabric. Okay, so that is why many women workers, because it was the women workers who were employed in the job of spinning. Okay, they were rendered jobless, they were rendered unemployed, all right, and they caused an unrest. Okay, so this was the first part of the chapter where we discussed about the advent of industrialization in the British area, okay, in England, okay, especially in the timeline of 1730s to 1840s roughly. All right. In the next part of the chapter, we'll be talking about what was the impact of this industrialization when the Britishers, they started spreading they're spreading their advancement from the Occident side to the Orient side, means from the Western side to the Eastern side. Okay, and what do we have in the Orient side? What colony do we have in the Eastern side? The very important colony of Britain, that was India. Okay, so we'll be discussing about the impacts of industrialization in India in the next part of the chapter.